one of our two annual reminders of the most important special Shabbatot of the year, Shabbat Shuvah and Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat before Passover. So what was the minhag on these two Shabbatot? Rabbis gave very, very long sermons. So get comfortable. That's why I'm up here and not you. Thank you very much. It's nice to have friends that leave you standing dry and alone. This morning, the Parshat's short, so I'm actually not going to talk that long. This morning in Parshat Ha'azinu, it's a poetic but deeply prophetic song delivered by Moses at the end of his life. It's a call to remember Israel's history, to confront its failures, and return to the Brit, to the covenant, to God. These themes feel especially urgent as we reflect on the events of October 7th, almost a year ago, when Hamas launched a devastating attack on Israel, and the more recent missile strikes from Iran. These moments of pain and fear are now etched in our collective memories. As we grapple with these challenges on this Shabbat Shuvah, it seems that Maimonides, Rambam's framework for tshuva, for repentance, provide us with a pathway forward that we Jews have found throughout millennia. Tshuva, repentance, isn't simply about saying, I'm sorry, brushing it off, and then moving on. It's a structured process that, if followed, has the capacity to lead to meaningful change and transformation. Let's take a look this morning then at Maimonides, at Rambam's 5 steps of tshuva, 5 steps of repentance in light of the Parsha, and consider how they might apply to the difficult moments that we're living through today. The first step of tshuva, according to Rambam, is hakarat hachet, the recognition of our mistakes. In Ha'azinu, we hear at the very beginning of the Parsha a powerful call to accountability. Hatzur tamim po'olo, ki kol derachav mishpat, the rock, God's deeds are perfect, for all God's ways are just. El umana ve'ein avel tzadik v'yasharhu, a faithful God, never false, true and upright is God. God's justice is unshakable. We human beings, on the other hand, we falter frequently. And the Torah reminds us that we are called to realign ourselves to God's righteousness. That's the process of tshuva, of repentance. In Israel today, there is a growing call for a state inquiry into the events of October 7th. Many are asking whether there were lapses in security and leadership and whether the attacks could have been prevented. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to delay such an inquiry till after the war, while others, like President Herzog, want them to begin right now. Regardless of the timing, what we know is that it is a critical step for Israel. It is an act of hakarat hachet, the recognizing of our mistakes, which is necessary for healing, rebuilding, restoring trust, and ensuring a safer future. Rambam teaches that without this step, without hakarat hachet, without recognizing where we went wrong, there's no path forward. The same is true for us as individuals. It's uncomfortable, but we must learn to face our failings if we are to grow. Whether in public or personal life, the principle remains the same. Accountability leads to healing. The second step in Rambam's steps of tshuva is charata, genuine regret for our mistakes. In the Parsha, Moshe recounts how Israel, in its prosperity, grew complacent. Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivam Vayiv'at, Shemanta Avita Kasita, Vayitosh Eloha Asul, Vayinabel Tzur Yeshuato. But Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and thick, says the Torah. You grew complacent. You forsook the God who made you and spurned the rock of his support. This pasuk, this verse, reflects a common human tendency. Reverend, you kind of hinted at it in your short remarks, that when things are going well, we often lose sight of what really matters. We lose sight of our values. But true tshuva, repentance, begins with a deep sense of regret for the ways in which we may have strayed from the path. Today, as the war continues, grief and regret fill the air. We mourn the lives lost, the suffering endured, and the feelings of regret are not just personal, they're national. There is a collective sorrow for the ways in which vigilance has lapsed, for how we find ourselves again in a cycle of bloodshed. But in Rambam's framework, regret is not passive. It's the spark that ignites change. Regret can inspire us to act differently, to avoid complacency, and to seek better outcomes in the future. The third step of tshuva is vidui, confession. This is the act of speaking aloud what we have done wrong and owning our actions. Hazinu contains a stern warning from God. Ki goy oved atzot hema ve'ein bahem tvuna. For they are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. Lu chachmu yaskilu zot yavinu la'achreitam. If they are wise, they would understand this, and they would discern their latter end. Without vidui, without confession, without confronting our mistakes and speaking them aloud, we are stuck in a cycle of poor choices, unable to discern the consequences of our actions. In the wake of October 7th, a different vidui is occurring, happening within the Jewish community. After the attack, many Jews around the world took to social media to express their emotions. Anger, fear, and grief poured in real time. But what followed was often heated and hurtful. Accusations of not being Zionist enough, or questioning each other's loyalty based on political views and divisions within the community. At a time when unity is so crucial, these divisions, these debates, threaten to tear at the fabric of our people. Phil David, our executive director, noted this tension on Wednesday, just before Rosh Hashanah. CJN, Canadian Jewish News, dropped off 250 copies of its fall magazine. And on the front cover of it is a depiction of a family at a Rosh Hashanah table. And in the upper right corner is a young woman wearing watermelon earrings, a keffiyeh. Her face, interestingly, out of all the faces at the table, is looking away from the table, not at the table. And Phil questioned whether or not this is something that we should put out for people to have. That maybe showing this magazine, showing the tension that exists in the community is something that we should pull from the table rather than put it out there. But if we're practicing vidui, if we're practicing confession, how can we hide from the reality that's taking place in our community? The opposite is really what we must do, is we have to name it, seek to understand it, and work to build bridges. because that's what vidui is about, and that's why it becomes essential. We must confess, as individuals and as a community, that our words and actions during this crisis have not always been kind, have not always been aligned with our highest values. Vidui allows us to pause, to reflect, and to change course, resolving not to and change course before we make matters worse. Rambam's fourth step of tshuva is Kabbalah la'atid, resolving not to repeat the same mistakes again. It's not enough to recognize and regret our actions. We must also make a conscious choice to behave differently in the future. In Ha'azinu, Moshe warns Israel against thinking that our own strength alone guarantees victory. Lulei ka'as oyev agur pen yinakru teremo, pen yomru yadenu rama velo Adonai poel kol zot. Had I not feared the provocation of the enemy, says Moshe, lest their adversary should misjudge, lest they should say, our own hand has prevailed, and not Adonai, not God, who has wrought all of this. This verse reminds us that while divine inspiration may guide us, it is our actions, guided by ethics and responsibility, that determine the outcome. We must resolve to choose differently, knowing that our choices shape our destiny. As Israel faces the ongoing war with Hamas and the broader tensions with Hezbollah and now with Iran, our resolve must be both practical and ethical. Military strength may be necessary, but it's only part of the equation. Our resolve must be rooted in a moral vision. We must have the courage to pursue justice, but to also actively seek peace. This means not allowing fear and hatred to dictate our future. The final step of tshuva is tikkun, repair. This is when we see the fruits of our repentance and begin to restore what is broken. Ha'azinu closes with a promise of hope. Harginu goyim amo kidam avadav yikom. God will avenge the blood of God's servants. V'nakam yashiv letzarav v'chiper admato imo. And will render vengeance to God's adversaries and will atone for God's land and God's people. After all the pain and suffering, there is hope. Hope for reconciliation and atonement. This promise of tikkun speaks to the future we long for, a world where justice prevails, where wrongs are righted, and where peace is possible. In the midst of the current conflict, I admit, it's really hard to see that future. But just as we seek atonement for our personal sins, we must believe that Israel and its neighbors can find a path towards reconciliation as well. I know it doesn't seem possible now, but quite frankly, neither did the Abraham Accords in 1948, in 1967, in 1973, or even in 1982. As we prepare for Yom Kippur, Ha'azinu calls on us to embrace the process of tshuva in its fullest sense. Rambam's 5 steps, Hakarat hachet, recognition, Charata, regret, Vidui, confession, Kabbalah la'atid, resolve, and Tikkun, repair, provide a roadmap for personal and collective healing. May we have the strength to follow this path in both our personal lives and as a people. And may we soon find the day when the prophecy of Ha'azinu is fulfilled, when justice reigns and peace is restored, not just for us, but for all. Shabbat Shalom, Gemar Chatima Tova.